We're working to connect a region of over 600 million bridges between our lands.
Good evening, I'm Alma Angeles, and you're watching ASEAN in Focus on tonight's headlines. The death toll in cyclone hit Myanmar rises as villagers tried to piece together ruined homes and waited for aid and support. Cyclone Mocha was the most powerful cyclone to hit the area in more than a decade, churning up villages, uprooting trees, and knocking out communications across much of Rakhine State. Singapore hanged a man for trafficking drugs, according to authorities in the city-state's second execution in 3 weeks. The man was convicted in 2019 of trafficking around 3.3 pounds of cannabis. Just Energy Transition Partnerships, or JETP, are becoming an increasingly important part of the global energy transition. A handful of developing nations have already signed up to JETPs, of which Vietnam and Indonesia are the most recent. And according to a new UN report, prospects for a robust global economic recovery remain dim amid stubborn inflation, rising interest rates, and heightened uncertainties. Instead, the world economy faces the risk of a prolonged period of low growth as the lingering effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. First in our news, the death toll in cyclone hit Myanmar rose to at least 81 as villagers tried to piece together ruined homes and waited for aid and support. Mocha was the most powerful cyclone to hit the area in more than a decade, churning up villages, uprooting trees, and knocking out communications across much of Rakhine State. Humanitarians expressed deep concern for Myanmar's most vulnerable communities after the nightmare scenario created by the passage of Cyclone Mocha. With coastal winds recorded at up to 250 kilometers per hour, making landfall off the Bay of Bengal, the storm tore through villages in Myanmar's Rakhine State, leaving villagers to piece together their ruined homes while they wait for aid and support.
As the cyclone cut a swath through Rakhine and the northwest, 5.4 million people are expected to have been in the path of the cyclone, facing winds in excess of 90 kilometers per hour. Of these, we consider 3.1 million people to be most vulnerable to cyclone impacts by taking together indicators of shelter quality, food insecurity, and of course, poor coping capacity. It's really a nightmare scenario for the cyclone to hit areas with such deep pre-existing needs. The cyclone was packing winds of 250 km per hour as it approached the coast, ripping off roofs, uprooting trees, bringing down power lines, and smashing fishing boats. It was a truly terrifying experience for those in the path of the cyclone, many thousands of whom had taken refuge in evacuation centers and now face a massive cleanup and huge reconstruction effort ahead. We're yet to get a full picture of the damage elsewhere in the cyclone's path, of course, but we fear for the worst, given that majority of the shelters in this very impoverished part of the country are mostly made of bamboo, and thus stood little chance in the face of these winds. One of the IDP camp leaders who talked to our humanitarian team in Sitwe has indicated that the storm hit camps hard this time, causing destruction and washing away shelters and latrines. They said the immediate needs are shelter, clean water, and sanitation.
WHO has mobilized health supplies to treat 200,000 people. Water purification tablets have also been provided. We are prioritizing supplies and equipment requested by the health cluster partners. As in any flood areas, where access to safe drinking water and sanitation is a challenge, there is a risk of waterborne diseases such as diarrhea, hepatitis, and those caused by mosquitoes such as dengue and malaria. Unofficial reports indicate 14 health facilities across the country has been damaged. We are still gathering more information on this.
Singapore on Wednesday hanged a man for trafficking drugs, according to authorities, in the city-state's second execution in 3 weeks. The man was convicted in 2019 of trafficking around 1.5 kilos or 3.3 pounds of cannabis, according to Kokila Anamalai of local rights group Transformative Justice Collective. Singapore has some of the world's toughest anti-narcotics laws. Trafficking more than 500 grams of cannabis can result in the death penalty. A 36-year-old Singaporean man had his capital sentence carried out today at Changi Prison Complex, according to a spokesman for the city-state's prison service. Singapore's Central Narcotics Bureau, or CNB, said in a separate statement that it would not release the name of the man to respect his family's wish for privacy. A last-ditch appeal to review the case and stay his execution was dismissed on Tuesday. Despite growing international calls to abolish the death penalty, Singapore insists that it's an effective deterrent against trafficking. The Wednesday execution was the second in Singapore this year after Tangeraju Supiya, 46, was hanged on April 26 for conspiracy to smuggle a kilo of cannabis. In other news, Just Energy Transition Partnerships, or JETP, are becoming an increasingly important part of the global energy transition. A handful of developing nations have already signed up to JETPs, of which Vietnam and Indonesia are the most recent. In this context, the Just Energy Transition Partnership provide innovative lessons for the region in how to architect, example, design, and execute financing for the energy transition in the region. Take a look.
So, of course, why the event? What is the basic motivation? Why we want to accelerate energy transition? Of course, as we know, the Asia-Pacific region released 18.9 billion tons of carbon emissions in 2020, essentially from fuel combustion. It has now reached the highest level global share of energy-related emissions, approaching 60%, which is significantly high. The region's continued reliance on coal is the major culprit for this reason. The share of coal is still 62.7% of the region's energy-related emissions. I won't dwell too much on the changing macroeconomic conditions. I'm sure most of us are aware. This is from our latest forecast from the Asia-Pacific region. Significant deceleration in the rate of economic growth from a high of 7.3% 2021 to less than half now, 3.3, estimated for 2022. And similarly, inflation is on the other side, has accelerated significantly from about 3.4% to 7.6%. And there are many other implications. Countries' fiscal space are very constrained. Their ability to go after the sustainable development ambitions is getting adversely affected, and so on and so forth.
Fighting climate change has thus been one of the top priority of Indonesia. Green growth, renewables, and energy transition are an integral part of our sustainable growth and development strategy. So with that, we see that particular importance is our efforts for transformational technology and, of course, financing. So when the JETP was launched in November, we of course saw this as an opportunity as an octane to turbo boost our efforts in achieving our targets on energy transition and the targets for net zero by 2060.
With that in mind, on our part, Vietnam is committed to take ownership of the JETP and are taking necessary steps to legalize the JETP political declaration, setting up the JETP secretariat, preparing the resources mobilization plan, I think by the end of this year. The participation of the whole political and government systems, as well as the engagement of all other stakeholders will be the key in this process. And international support is vital to complement our domestic efforts. According to the UNDP, the development of renewable energy sources requires a massive effort that could absorb as much as 60 billion per year by 2050.
And currently that we are at about 22% of our energy mix is from renewable energy. And we're trying to get that to about 30% or even more than that by 2030 to achieve our NDC goals, and probably even higher with the JETP contribution, and as we already committed in our political declaration. So, of course, that there's a lot of challenges there as well, but we believe that with the support from JETPs, and we consider of course, the $15.5 billion is a lot of investment, but still, similar to Indonesia, is only a part of what we need from now to 2030 and even to 2050 is a lot more investment needed, as our Ambassador Zhang already stated as well. But it would be a very good trigger for energy transition in Vietnam.
The first JETP was announced at the 26th UN Climate Change Conference of the Parties, or COP26 in Glasgow, for South Africa for $8.5 billion in late 2022, and Indonesia and Vietnam announced JETPs for respectively $20 billion and $15.5 billion US dollars. According to a new UN report, prospects for a robust global economic recovery remain dim, and stubborn inflation, rising interest rates, and heightened uncertainties. Instead, the world economy faces the risk of a prolonged period of low growth as the lingering effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. Take a look.
On the surface, there is some improvement in our 2023 forecast from January. Global growth is now expected to be at around 2.3%, up from the 1.9% we were expecting then. And global inflation is projected to decline from 7.5% in 2022 to 5.2% in 2023. But behind these somewhat modest improvements lie less happy realities and their causes for concern. The scarring from the pandemic, mounting debt vulnerabilities, the dimming prospects for investment, and structural challenges that are still there, they raise the prospects of continuing subpar growth, which is deeply damaging for the SDGs.
In the United States, resilient household spending has prompted an upward revision of the growth forecast to 1.1% in 2023. The European Union's economy, driven by lower gas prices and robust consumer spending, is projected to grow by 0.9%. China's growth this year is now forecast at 5.3% as a result of the COVID-19 related restrictions being lifted. But a somber picture remains. Despite this uptick, the growth rate is still well below the average growth rate in the 2 decades before the pandemic of 3.1%.
Upward revision that we have achieved, we have seen, is mainly driven by strong household demand in the US, in Europe, and recovery in China. And this was rather unexpected. Household consumption spending remained resilient over the first quarter of 2023, and that led to this upward revision. But there are also some new risks that emerged during this since our last report, and namely the banking turmoil in the U.S. that has created some uncertainty or added more uncertainty to the system, global economic outlook.
For many developing countries, growth prospects have deteriorated amid tightening credit conditions and rising external financial costs. In Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean, GDP per capita is projected to increase marginally this year, reinforcing a longer-term trend of stagnating economic performance. The least developed countries are forecast to grow by 4.1% in 2023 and 5.2% in 2024, far below the 7% growth target set in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development.
The picture is divergent for countries. There's no one-size-fits-all here, and you would see different paths. But overall, many of the developing countries remain extremely vulnerable in this environment.
In other news, plastic pollution could reduce by 80% by 2040 if countries and companies make deep policy and market shifts using existing technologies. That according to a new report by the UN Environment Program, or UNEP. Briefing journalists in New York, here's spokesperson for the Secretary General, Stéphane Dujarric.
Just want to flag that our colleagues in Nairobi at the UN Environment Program say that plastic pollution could be reduced by 80% and result in the savings of over $300 billion a year if countries and companies make deep policy and market shifts using existing technology. The report recommends first eliminating unnecessary plastics to reduce the size of the problem, and then implementing the reuse, recycle, and reorientation and diversification of plastic products. The report also suggests ways to deal with the remaining plastic pollution legacy. It's available on the internet.
The report is released ahead of a second round of negotiations in Paris on a global agreement to beat plastic pollution and outlines the magnitude and nature of the changes required to end plastic pollution and create a circular economy. UNEP suggests setting and implementing design and safety standards for disposing of non-recyclable plastic waste and making manufacturers responsible for products shedding microplastics. Overall, the shift to a circular economy would result in $1.27 trillion in savings, considering costs and recycling revenues. A further $3.25 trillion would be saved from avoided externalities such as health, climate, air pollution, marine ecosystem degradation, and litigation-related costs. Such a shift could result in a net increase of 700,000 jobs by 2040, mostly in low-income countries, significantly improving the livelihoods of millions of workers in informal settings, according to the report. The Department of Information and Communications Technology Secretary Ivan John Oy said they are looking to improve internet connectivity in 94 identified tourist destinations in the country before the end of this year. He said this will be done through the activation or deployment of the needed internet infrastructure, which will boost connectivity in these destinations.
In a matter of a few months, we've already put into the program that for the first phase, we will be able to deploy about 46 out of the 94 destinations that will be lightened with free internet connectivity. And under this phase one, it will cover some of the very major sites of tourism, which is Baguio, Palawan, Boracay, Cebu, and several others. Tourism destinations identified as a priority. So this is a joint initiative with the Department of Tourism and Department of Information Communications Technology. As we all very well know, many of the tourists now are also vloggers. They vlog about their experience while they are there experiencing or enjoying the tourism sites. So it's critical that we provide them with the internet connectivity. So while they're there enjoying those experiences, they can actually be also our marketing tool in propagating the message to them, how they're having fun in the Philippines and how they're enjoying the Philippine experience.
And finally, the Philippines avenged the disappointment of an opening game defeat and reasserted their Southeast Asian Games dominance, beating host Cambodia to clinch the men's basketball gold. They beat Cambodia 80-69 in a pressure cooker final in Phnom Penh with 23 points from starman Justin Brownlee. Coach Chot Reyes hoped the public pressure on him might ease in the basketball-mad Philippines, which prizes its traditional SEA Games dominance. At least, he said, we get a reprieve from the people. The Philippines arrived in Cambodia aiming to take revenge on Indonesia, whose surprise win in the final at the 2021 Hanoi Games, played in 2022 because of the COVID pandemic, ended their 20-year golden streak. However, it was Cambodia who emerged as their toughest foes this time, beating them in the group stage with a new-look squad controversially composed by Coach Harry Savaya of mostly naturalized players. Savaya incensed the Philippine bench during that shock opening win by tilting his head onto his hands in a night-night gesture, as he called a late-game timeout. The heat inside the non-air-conditioned basketball venue added to the gripes of the Philippine management. The venue, filled with a partisan home crowd, was sweltering as Cambodia ended the first quarter with a 22-21 lead. But the outnumbered Philippine fans made themselves heard as their side battled to a 44-33 halftime lead thanks to 15 points from Brownlee. The visitors then mostly held Cambodia at bay throughout the third and fourth quarters. Sabaya was a kinetic presence on the sidelines, the Lebanese-Armenian coach whipping up the home crowd. He even danced after his team shot a particularly nice three-pointer. But the Philippine fans gleefully returned his infamous night-night gesture as the clock ticked down and their victory became inevitable. As my usual habit, I'd like to end the day on a positive note. Let's encourage and build each other up so that no one is left behind. And that's it for tonight's broadcast of ASEAN in Focus. I'm Alma Angela, staying in the news because we live in extraordinary times. Good night.